Alrighty. Chapter 10. Higher than Everest. That's some good weed. After a meal that is better left undescribed, we crowded into one small tent to discuss future plans. The question was, what were we to do about Pong? Several suggestions were made, but none was both practical and humane. Wish summed up in his precise way, saying, "We must accept Pong as one of the hazards of the mountain and make our plans accordingly." Constance said that he and I had had Pong for 4 days and it was somebody else's turn. Wish said that, in principle, he was entirely in agreement with this, but we must see how it worked out in practice. We must, he said, assume that when we split up, Pong would attach himself to the larger party in order to do the maximum amount of damage. But he could be thwarted in this by a simple stratagem. We were now 5. In the morning, 2 would move off together to establish Camp 3, leaving behind 3 at Camp 2. Pong would naturally stay with these 3, but shortly afterwards, one of the 3 would leave, either for Camp 3 or to return to Camp 1 again. Again, Pong would stay with the majority. Later on, the remaining 2 would split so that Pong's sphere of influence could be reduced to 1. "Isn't that rather hard on the last man?" I asked. "It's only for a short while," Wish assured me. "We can change around later to suit circumstances. Is it agreed, then?" Constant and I glanced at each other doubtfully, but Shoot and Jungle said they would be a perfect scream and congratulated Wish on his masterly command of strategy. "Very well," he said. "Now, it's obvious that Binder and Applecart are in no condition to go up to Camp 3. "Agreed," said Shoot and Jungle. "In fact," Wish continued, "it is essential that they take a day's rest." "Absolutely," said Shoot and Jungle. "So they must stay here with Pong." "Nothing else will do," said Shoot and Jungle. "And now for the others. I take it that you two don't want to go together?" "Certainly not," said Shoot and Jungle. I wondered why. "So I shall go to Camp 3 with one of you. Which is it to be?" "Jungle," said Shoot. "Shoot," said Jungle. "You'd better toss for it," Wish suggested. "Heads," said Shoot. "It's tails," said Jungle. "Congratulations, old boy. You'll be the first to go higher than Everest." "But I won," said Jungle. "Well, of course you did. The loser stays behind." "But I thought it was the other way around." "Why ever would it be?" said Shoot. "Well," said Jungle. "Of course," Shoot went on, "if you think I'm trying to diddle you—" Jungle said nothing. "You don't trust me." Jungle hung his head. "After all I've done for you," Jungle wriggled. "Very well," said Shoot. "We'll toss up again." "Heads. Heads it is," said Jungle. "My choice. I didn't like to mention it before, but I'm not feeling quite up to the mark. I daren't risk letting the side down. I will go back to Camp 1. Jungle looked a little bewildered. He withdrew from the conversation and sat for a while, for quite a long time, with a puckered brow, muttering to himself and counting off points on his fingers. From time to time he would open his mouth to speak, then think better of it. Finally he gave a deep sigh and became quite still, staring at nothing, like one who had given up all hope and was quietly waiting for death. I scented undercurrents, but I was too tired to investigate. Besides, I had other worries. How were Constant and I going to endure another day at the mercy of Pong? I put the problem to Wish, and that master strategist produced a workable plan. Someone must decoy Pong out of the cooking tent so that someone else could steal some food, which would be concealed in the sleeping bags of Constant and myself. Tomorrow we would live on this store, telling Pong we required no meals. Thus, we would save a whole day to recover our digestion. Wish suggested that those traveling with Pong should take only the plainest food, upon which his black art would have the least effect. This was agreed upon. It was hard to forego the dainties which we had looked forward to for so long, but it was better than having them reduced to the sickening messes which Constant and I had already endured. The raid on the larder was organized. Jungle was sent outside to hide behind a cliff. Then Constant called Pong into our tent and engaged him in conversation. They had exchanged only a few gurgles when Pong moved his head as though listening to a faint sound. Next moment, he rushed from the tent and we heard him bellowing as he ran towards the kitchen. We all hurried outside to see Jungle flying down the mountain with Pong after him. Wish, quick-witted as ever, dashed into the kitchen and emerged with an armful of food of various kinds. He ran straight to our tent with it, and it was lucky he did so, for Pong abandoned his chase suddenly and hurried back to the kitchen, where he squatted in the doorway, glowering at us. Jungle was now out of sight, but the general opinion was that we should never see him again. There was nothing else for it, a search party must be organized. The porters were sent after him, while the rest of us stood by ready to defect him, with our lives, if need be, against another attack. It was 2 hours before the search party returned, Jungle being carried on the back of a small but sturdy porter. Pong made no move, and we went back to our tent in peace. Tired though I was, I considered it my duty to acquaint myself with everything that had transpired since our last meeting at Advanced Base 5 days before. In his 2 days at Camp 1, Wish had melted 1,300 weight of ice and recalibrated his thermometers. Chute had run off 2,000 feet of film, and had the lid not been accidentally knocked off his dark box, exposing the contents to daylight, some very fine sequences might have resulted. Jungle had swung his compasses higher than compasses had ever been swung before. Those which survived were to be considered accurate within certain limits which he was unable to determine. We called Burley on the walkie-talkie and learned that he was still recuperating and did not consider it advisable to move from Camp 1 just yet. Finally asked if anybody had any unusual experiences to report. The response was most interesting. Both Wish and Chute experienced high-altitude hallucinations. Wish had seen differential equations, test tubes, and Wimhurst machines, while Chute had been frightened by a vision of a camera obscura. Jungle had shown a tendency to wander when not roped to the others, and he had also become convinced that he was being followed by a prude. When asked what a prude was, he became confused. Wish said, "Nice going, wanderer," as if Jungle were somehow responsible for the prude, and they all burst out laughing. I must say the point, if any, of the joke escaped me. I dare say they were suffering from altitude hysteria. We turned in a happy and united party, and in spite of Pong's support, I spent a reasonably comfortable night. When he asked what a prude was. Next morning, we were astir early. Jungle and Wish went off without breakfast, intending to stop for a meal as soon as they were out of sight of Pong. They took with them all the tasty food, leaving us only lentils and pemmican, which were considered to be the most Pong-proof of our supplies, being naturally unappetizing. Chute departed shortly after with his one porter, leaving Constant and me with Solo, Lotu, and Pong. We went back to our sleeping bags, where we stayed all day, feeding ourselves on cold food and hiding the debris. In early evening we had a call from Chute, who was safely back at Camp 1 with Burley. Burley, he said, had fully recuperated and considered himself re-acclimatized. He had, however, contracted sleeping bag lassitude and did not feel justified in setting out just yet. Wish called shortly afterwards. He and Jungle had a hard day, but had reached the point where the ridge on which we were climbing merged with the face of the mountain and had established Camp 3 at 31,000 feet. Fixed ropes had been left in the difficult places. He had seen some more differential equations in 2 filter funnels and heard 3 retorts. Jungle had shown a tendency to walk backwards. We rose bedtimes the following morning. Our private store of food had given out, and we were forced to breakfast on lentils and pemmicans prepared by Pong. Constant took one mouthful and turned pale. "I'm sorry, old boy, I just can't face it. I must go down to Camp 1. This was sad news, but hardly surprising. We parted regretfully. We had been through much together. I told Constant that the manly way in which he had borne his sufferings was a continual inspiration to me, and I would treasure the memory of the 6 days we had spent together. Constant said he, too, would not forget in a hurry. Constant took Lotu, leaving me Solo and Pong. I let Solo take the lead, wishing to conserve my mental energies. I was on the lookout for high-altitude hallucinations and warples. Several times I thought I saw a warple, but it turned out to be a hallucination. Several times I thought I saw a hallucination, but it turned out to be a spot on my goggles. Once I thought I saw a spot on my goggles, it turned out to be a warple, which turned out to be a hallucination. To keep my stomach ache under control, I had taken little breakfast and was weak with hunger. I fed myself with dyspepsia tablets, which gave me a headache. I found by accident that licking the glacier cream off my face gave my stomach some relief. Unfortunately, this resulted in both sunburn and a frozen tongue. When I put my tongue back in my mouth to thaw, it gave me a toothache. I was also worried because most of my dream had come true. My four companions had dispersed exactly as they had done in the dream, which seemed sinister. All this interfered with the rhythm which is so essential to climbing at high altitude. I decided to forget everything and concentrate on the rhythm. I devised a little rhyme to keep step with my feet. Organ grinders, kings and queens, call for binders, butter, beans. 3 times daily, knave and noodle, eat them gaily on rum doodle. This went around and around in my brain all day, made such a nuisance of itself that it only added to my worries. I began to fear I was about to lose control of my destiny. Luckily, we reached Camp 3 before this happened. Still, in control of my destiny, I greeted Wish and Jungle, who were having a rest day. In expectation of meeting Pong again, they had already dined, and they had managed to keep their stores out of his reach. I dined alone on lentils and pemmican. I was tired out, but happy in the thought that I should soon be relieved of Pong, but somehow it turned out quite differently. Using the anti-Pong strategy, which Wish said had worked so well at Camp 2, Wish decided that one of us must go off alone in the morning, leaving Pong with the majority of 2. Later, one of these would go, leaving Pong with the last man. Since I needed rest, I must be that last man. Wish was very nice about it. He said I had his deepest sympathies. He said that if anything, he was more upset about it than I was. He said that the only strictest sense of duty restrained him from insisting on taking Pong himself, whatever I might say. He said that he never felt so actually the conflict between personal desire and the welfare of the expedition. He said that I would understand. I said I did indeed, and felt his distress as deeply as he did himself. I begged him to put a brave face on it and let duty be its own reward. He thanked me and said that he would not forget my words. It was with a sense of deep humility that I wished him a good night and went to my lonely tent. And so next morning, Wish started first, taking one porter in an attempt to establish Camp 4. Jungle said that he had deteriorated badly and must at all costs go down to Camp 1 to recuperate. While he was waiting for the day to warm up, I tried to persuade him to talk about himself, and was at last able to say tactfully that I understood he had no fiancée. He said that this was the case, and I said that no doubt one of his roving disposition was not naturally disposed to bind himself with home ties. He surprised me by saying that on the contrary, he felt deeply the need for a home and a loved one. He reminded me that every bird has its nest and every expedition its base. He was in the unhappy position of being, as it were, an expedition without a base, a bird without a nest. During his wanderings, he consoled his lonely heart with dreams of finding its desire. He liked to think that some day, over the brow of some distant hill, he would find his spiritual home in a small but well-built cottage with modern plumbing. He would find the soulmate who had waited faithfully for the lover she had dreamed of for so many lonely years. His wanderings, he said, were all towards somewhere, but where, he did not know. This was why he sometimes had been known to lose his way. I said that I was touched by his confidence. I said I knew very well how he felt, having myself been a wanderer in my younger days. I asked Jungle whether he had never found a young lady to his taste. He said yes, he had found quite a number. In fact, he was always finding them. He said that unfortunately he lost them as quickly as he found them. He was in the habit of taking them on excursions on Saturday afternoons and almost invariably mislaid them. He had lost 3 in succession on the 6th on the South Downs. On the first occasion, they had been overtaken by mist, and Jungle was instructed his lady to remain where she was while he went for help. He took a northerly course until he reached a farm, and then returned due south with a search party. The silly girl must have moved, for they were unable to find her. I asked him whether she had reached home safely. He said that he had not inquired. A girl who moved about in the mist against orders was hardly worth inquiring about. The next lady disappeared while Jungle was swinging his compass. The third became annoyed when Jungle inadvertently led her in a circle and walked off. He had lost several on the Underground, 2 or 3 in Waterloo Station, and any number in Hampton Court Maze. I made the friendly suggestion that next time, having found his lady, Jungle might keep a hold of her and refrain from wandering. He said that he had often decided to do this, but it didn't seem to be in his nature. He was, he said, the victim of a destiny. It was his fate to go on finding his heart's desire and losing it, wandering about the face of the earth, forever homeless and lonely. I said that was the very stuff of tragedy. It was so poetic it must be true. I begged Jungle to think of himself as one chosen to fulfill a high and stern purpose, and to put away weak desires and accept his calling. He thanked me and said he would try to do as I suggested. He said his earthly consolation would be that, himself a wanderer, he might sometimes be granted the privilege of guiding others. At this point, Pong brought his midday meal, and Jungle departed hurriedly for Camp 1 with his porter. Left alone, I tried to meditate on the responsibilities of leadership, but so weakened were my powers of concentration that I could think of nothing but apricot jam. Camp 1 was out of range, but in the evening I had a conversation with Wish, who had established Camp 4 at 33,000 feet. It was indeed good news. It cheered me so much that I was able, with no effort at all, to think of plum jam and marmalade. I asked Wish whether he liked plum jam. I think he thought I was light-headed.